You may have never actually heard of Strathmill Distillery in Scotland because they've only ever actually had one official bottling. But today I have a 24-year-old independent bottling from Strathmill Distillery. Hey guys, I'm Nath Martyn, the Whisky Scribe. I'm a whisky enthusiast and I love all things whisky. But taste is subjective and there's a lot of different whiskies out there. So whether you consider yourself a connoisseur or you're just looking to understand more about whisky, let's explore it all together. If you want to see more from me, hit the subscribe button there. I do regular whisky review videos and some education pieces, and you can also follow me over on Instagram. Now, if you haven't heard of Strathmill Distillery before, it's because they predominantly produce whiskey for blends. Things like Old Master, Dunhill, and J&B. The distillery was founded in 1891 as the Glen Isla Glenlivet Distillery in the Speyside region, but it was sold just 4 years later and the name was changed to Strathmill Distillery, and today it's actually part of the Diageo range. Now, I've never actually tasted anything from the Strathmill Distillery before, because even the independent bottlings are few and far between. But the whiskey here is meant to have a very distinctive taste, due in part to the purifiers on the linarms and the condensers of the stills. And it's meant to impart like a really delicate nature to the whiskey. The independent bottling that I have comes from Càrn Mòr, which is owned by Morrison Scotch Whisky Distillers. The spirit was distilled in June of 1994, aged in a single hogshead, which means that it's a 250 litre barrel that's being produced using the staves of an ex-bourbon barrel. It was bottled in January of 2019, giving it an age statement of 24 years. There were only 217 bottles released at a cask strength of 47.2%. Now, if 47.2% seems quite low for cask strength, keep in mind that in a lot of regions of Scotland, over time, the ABV in the cask actually reduces. Fun fact, in Australia, in certain regions, the ABV of the whiskey aging in a barrel actually increases over time. So I have had 4-year-old Australian whiskies that are around 70% ABV. So even though it's 47.2%, it has not been watered down. This is cask strength. Nothing has been added to this whiskey since 1994 when it was actually distilled, which is phenomenal. So there's not really too much else to say. I'm just going to dive into it. There's not a whole lot of marketing for a distillery that doesn't release its own whiskey. This is also another whiskey that I had through a whiskey exchange through Uncle Baldrick. Thank you very much, Uncle Baldrick. I can't wait to try this. Though clearly I can wait because it has sat there for like 2 years, but you know, life gets in the way. Okay, look. Take a look at that color and tell me what you think for a 24-year-old whiskey. Now, I'm not disappointed with this whiskey. I'm disappointed with the color of other whiskeys that are significantly younger and significantly darker. I've done a video before where I talk about the use of E150A color in whiskey. This clearly does not have color added to it. That is an incredibly light straw colored whiskey, but it is 24 years old. Now, if 24 years in an ex-bourbon cask is only going to produce that much color, how much E150A color is added to so many other whiskies that are significantly younger than this, bourbon casks, and look so much darker? 24 years. I mean, like I said, my disappointment is not with this whiskey, it is with the other whiskies that are so much darker at a much younger age. But I'm going to try and get off that. Because this whiskey has beautiful, thick, oily legs, which I absolutely love. It's got that light golden color. And on the nose, it's interesting. There's kind of like a wet straw or a wet grain sort of aroma to this. There's a little bit of vanilla happening in there. Yeah, it's quite it's a surprisingly soft nose. There's an element of sweetness happening, but it's not really pronounced. So there should be a lot more on the palate itself. Slange. There is so much more going on the palate compared to the nose. The nose wasn't bad, it was just very, very soft and delicate, and there wasn't a whole lot much happening there. The palate is creamy vanilla. You've got this faint note of chocolate happening. It's so, like I've mentioned before, I like it when you have a whiskey that has that flavor of like almost like butterscotch sort of biscuit, because that's that grain sort of flavor coming across. This almost takes that further, and the creaminess almost takes that biscuit sort of flavor note comes across almost more oaty, like the creaminess. It's kind of coming across like when you have like a bowl of porridge. But yeah, the chocolate note sort of lingers on the palate towards the end. It's that oaty sort of toastiness comes through. It's if you're wanting a Scottish whiskey that really pays tribute to the grain, I would say this is it. And I wonder if that's that distinctive character of the Strathmill distillery that they were talking about, that where it's so delicate that it kind of lets the spirit talk. But I genuinely think from those flavor notes, most of the flavors that you're getting from this are actually coming from the spirit themselves. So I'm not getting a lot of, there's a teeny bit of vanilla and a teeny bit of oak, but that's the only thing that I'm really getting coming across from the cask itself. So it makes me think that the ex-bourbon cask that they used for this was probably, it wouldn't have been first fill. Or if it was, then like whatever had been aged in it previously had spent a lot of time, because that cask is primarily spent. It's really just there as like a housing vessel to allow this spirit to develop on its own, which means they chose the right cask to age this for 24 years. Because it's easy, at 24 years in an ex-bourbon cask, it's really easy to get something that's so over-oaked that it would taste like you're chewing on matches. But that's beautiful. The grain is really the highlight here, and I love that. Like I said, that oiliness brings across this little bit of like a chocolate sort of flavor note. It's that coating you sort of get in your mouth after you've had like a little bit of chocolate, a little bit too much chocolate, because I love chocolate, and there's no little bit of chocolate for me. It's the whole block or nothing. But yeah, you get that faint note of chocolate at the back of your palate, which is delicious. But everything else that's coming through this for me, other than a little bit of vanilla, is grain based. I'm getting this oaty, like toast sort of, yeah, that's really perfectly done. Like often when you get flavor notes where the grain is so prevalent, it's because the whiskey is quite young. So it's great to get those grain notes, but they're not really, really well balanced because it hasn't had the time to develop properly and like all those flavors to harmonize. But that's a really classic example of what you want to get in terms of like the grain sort of flavor coming across in a single malt whiskey. That's ideal. I would almost call that iconic. I finished the glass, but I'm going to top a little bit more in there because on a second pour now, I am getting the tiniest bit of sweetness that I would call apple. It's only a little bit, but that makes me think that distinctive flavor note that they say that you get from the Strathmill distillery, that little bit of sweetness that's coming across now is potentially coming from, like they mentioned that Strathmill distillery is known for producing quite a delicate, unique flavor profile. And I think that's it. I mentioned that this is an independent bottling from Càrn Mòr, and the range of independent bottlings that they're calling this is Celebration of the Cask. And for me, I actually think that naming is quite wrong, because the cask has sort of taken a back seat and it's let the spirit do the talking. And if anything, this should be the celebration of the grain, because I'm getting very little from the cask itself, and most of the flavor notes that I'm getting here, I think, personally, subjectively, is what's coming across from the actual grain of the spirit itself, which is really unique, because so many whiskies, particularly Scottish whiskies, they want to really focus on the flavors that you're getting from the barrel itself. But this, for me, is letting the spirit do the talking. So I am very happy to have tried this one. And if you want to explore the actual grain flavors that come across in a whiskey, then the Strathmill 1994 Càrn Mòr Celebration of the Cask 24-year-old is the whiskey that you should be trying, if it's still available, because there were only 217 bottles done. So thank you, Uncle Baldrick, for sending this to me. This was absolutely wonderful. And it's exactly the sort of thing that I want to get if I'm tasting the spirit itself. Slange.